I think everyone's just joining from various places in Vienna. Most students are in Vienna. I'm here in London. Um, and we're also live streaming. Everyone, hello, who is joining us on YouTube. I can't claim to be any sort of influencer, so don't really know how that angle works, but welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm very, very delighted that Lex Fefegha has joined us this afternoon for a guest lecture. And I'm going to quickly introduce Lex and then hand over to him to give us a glimpse of his creative practice around emerging technologies. Before I do so, very quickly, Lex, there's my colleague Elizabeth in purple jumper, whom you've been communicating with. There's Stefan Zinal, our senior tutor. He's also in Vienna. And all our students are in various parts of the studio, scattered around. And some are joining remotely. All right. So Lex Fefegha is a creative technologist and artist whose work exists at the intersection of human creativity and machine intelligence. And in this semester, Lex, students are working on a brief from Google Research titled AI Speculations, and they've been asked to design an AI agent in the loosest sense of the word. So this is really relevant to your practice. Lex's practice involves pushing the boundaries of interaction and digital expression using machine learning, not just as a tool, but as a collaborator in the creative process. Dedicated to the creation of experiences that transcend conventional digital interaction, Lex crafts digital narratives and installations that are rich with emotional and cultural resonance. His commitment is to explore the poetic potential of technology, delivering works that provoke thought, evoke emotion, and celebrate the human element within the digital landscape. As he ventures into the realm of his Office of Art and Technology, his focus sharpens on pioneering projects that bridge the gap between emerging technologies and accessible, impactful art. His goal is to seed cultural vitality within technology, creating immersive experiences that not only engage but inspire and connect with audiences on a profound level. Outside of making art, Lex is a co-founder of the Radical Innovation Lab Comuzzi and was formerly an associate lecturer at the University of Arts London's Creative Computing Institute, teaching a module on computational futures and AI. I know Lex because we share a studio with Comuzzi, which is there. So it's been really nice to see. It's a different from our practice, but there are of course overlaps, and I'm just really happy that Lex can join us today. So with that, I hand over to you, Lex. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for that. Sorry, folks, my voice might be a bit temperamental. I've been suffering from a cold or flu, but thank you so much, Anab, for sharing that bio, which I recently created because I needed a bio and folks always ask me for stuff, and I'm terrible at describing myself. So it's a lovely full circle moment. Anab is one of and the work that she's done over the last decade plus more, with Superflux has been a big inspiration to me throughout. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to share. I'm going to share my slides and get started. And I think I can also share these slides as well with everyone. So I'm going to share it in the chat. So if you want to keep, following me as I speak, you should be able to or see that. Okay, cool. So my exploration of machine learning. This is my talk. Lex Fefegha has been introduced by NAB. I'm co-founder, creative technologist, Comuzzi, a small design adventure studio, innovation lab, whatever it is. I actually most times don't know what to describe it, but essentially, I spend most of my time crafting experiences, experiments, and interactive installations, plus whatever comes to my mind, really. I've been fortunate in order to build a practice and also create this sort of safe space where, being able to work with a bunch of different organizations over the last couple of years that kind of give us the freedom to explore our ideas, our concepts, but also try to solve particular problems for them. I guess today, I'm going to really kind of break down a couple of areas, a refresher on AI if we need it, introduction to Bishop Broaden, building things that get the world's attention, the visible mask, obviously the generative AI hype, and then I will end it with my reflections. The reflection on artificial intelligence. I feel like when I first came into the space, I was really interested, I was studying at Central St. Martin's doing a master's in innovation. And at that time, I was really interested actually in the physical and digital worlds coming together. As I was at CSM, I was interested actually in fashion, because CSM is mostly known for fine art and fashion, and I wanted to be part of the cool kids. I ain't a fashion designer, but I understand technology. So how do I get involved there? And I was about to write this dissertation, trying to explore that sort of lens. And I had someone come up to me who was like a lecturer, and she mentioned to me saying, um, "Why don't you look at the ethical implications of technology?" And I was like, "I don't want to do that because it feels super boring. I'm trying to, be around the cool kids." That was my headspace. This is a very ignorant version of me at that time. And so I was like, "Okay, cool. What should I look at?" So first, I was interested in the Internet of Things, and I was like, "Okay." We can talk about the privacy conversation and we can talk about does the world need another smart fridge? But then I looked at the lens of machine intelligence and I was like, okay, cool. And I remember like the visual when we talk about, engaging in a discourse analysis, and I use this in bracket free chat GPT for me, the visual of artificial intelligence was still these metallic robots that look like, what I have here, iRobot, Terminator, Ultron from the ages of Ultron. And I remember like reaching out, someone from DeepMind said this to me many years ago that when they introduced their ethics division, um, the Guardian, when they sent out their press article to the Guardian used this particular image, this thing of this metallic robots and stuff. And I guess as a black person working in an industry that is very much most times, black people are considered to be the fastest adopters of new technologies. But when you look at the statistics is that how many of them work in this space, that there's a big disproportion or disconnection in in that sort of reality. And so I was really interested in like, okay, cool, this technology is interesting. There's loads of conversation here, but how does it shape my world? I need to interrogate and find this more. And for me, it was like I spent a lot of time really trying to present to people the AI reality looks like this. You give it an image, it takes apart pixel by pixel through this process of convolution, and it's constantly trying to make a prediction. And I'm going to show that, like, a lot of the early days when I started exploring this space was this thing of how do I how do I reduce the barrier to entry to the people around me? I grew up in Peckham, South London, and we weren't talking about technology at that time. We weren't talking about these things. Our focus was just, hey, we're trying to get home, we're trying to survive, we're trying to, and it's like, okay, I'm in this space, I'm in this world. I want to be able to have conversations with the people who I love and care about here are these technologies, and these technologies might influence and shape the world you exist in. And how do we have that conversation? And that kind of led my original investigation into this space further. So I like to describe artificial intelligence in this simple way of the art of how to make computers do things at which humans are currently better. That is, I guess, the goal. And the process of machines learning to think like humans. And I'm going to quickly share this. This is a new tool which has just recently been released about Draw Fast by an organization called TL Draw and an organization as well. It's a collaboration. I think they're called File.ai, which stands for features and labels. And as I was doing this with school, I was like, okay, what does an artificial being actually look like? And I tried to, and the way how this works is you type in a prompt here, where I've written artificial being, and then I've tried to do a very terrible drawing. And this is this aspect of that, that personal agent. And, and I think it's an interesting thing for me a lot. And when I think about the ways how to develop this personal agent or this relationship with one, looking at how machines learn through those, different ways of you have supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement. learning and, supervised learning, which is, you label the data you train the machine with. Unsupervised learning, the machine aims to learn from the data. It's not labeled, as you can see in the visual example of customer purchase one, then recommend number two. Or you have reinforcement learning, which is where we're now getting to that point when we have the generative AI systems. And this, you see it with the tech industry, their goal is to create this AGI. I guess reinforcement learning is kind of that particular mechanism that is powering these machines, where the machine learns by trial and error through reward and punishment. And oh, okay, cool. I've looked, and the machine learning process is one that's messy. You got to collect data. And this used to be my process a long period of time ago. Whenever I created a project with machine learning or AI, was collecting this data, preparing this data, training the model, and then integrating that into a product and service. And that's kind of important as I go into the conversation around bias, as I begin to go into that now. And I want to introduce you to someone called Brisha. So this is Brisha Borden. I read about her many years ago in 2016, 2017, when I was writing my master's thesis. And I was interested in, the ethical implications of machine intelligence and artificial intelligence. And Bishop Borden was, somebody who in the state of Florida, she stole a bike and she got arrested for it. And she was a first-time offender. And at the time, the state of Florida's law system began to use this AI tool called Compass. Compass is most likely assesses an offender to try to predict how they might reoffend. You know, one of the things about and this was an investigation that was done by ProPublica. It was called Machine Bias, if anybody's interested in it. And what they began to find out and discover, was like, how does Brisha, somebody who's a first-time offender, is seen to most likely reoffend than Vernon, who's somebody who's more seasoned? How is he identified to be low risk? And then they began to open it up a lot more, as you can see with the comparison here, as I get my laser working. Um, you know, where you've got in this example, Brisha, she's got 4 juvenile misdemeanors, and then Vernon's got 2 armed robberies, 1 attempted armed robbery, and 1 grand theft. And Compass, this AI system, sort of was, being able to present these results. And it was a pattern that necessarily followed through. And one of the key things that they realized when they were trying to understand this is what actually happens. And in that process of data, right? If somebody gets arrested, there's a questionnaire that's given to this offender, and they have to answer a bunch of particular questions. Some of the questions is not, race doesn't take into the concept of factor, but societal dynamics and particular things take into effect and how someone's most likely to reoffend. There's an example of some of the questions, like if you live with both parents and they're later separated, how were you at the time? Or with this particular one here, this section here, how many of your friends, acquaintances have ever been arrested? How many of your friends, acquaintances have time in jail and prison? How many of your friends, acquaintances are gang members? And those particular things. And when I've always talked about this story, I've always talked about it in the context of myself, coming from where I come from, about that whole thing of like, if you were to ask me these particular questions myself, I can answer them really well and give you details and say, yes, a lot of my friends have been arrested. Some of my friends have served time in jail. Some of my friends were in these environments and moved that out. Now, if you look at me as a context, does this make me most likely to reoffend? But this is the danger, right, of when we feed, data into these models and they don't necessarily have that context, right? Bias occurs and this leads me to bias. Bias occurs in AI systems when the reflect human bias is held by the people involved in coding, collecting, selecting, or using that data to train the algorithms that power those artificial intelligent systems. And when I look at it in the context of this space of race and the criminal justice system, up to 1970s, race, nationality, and skin color were still a contributing factor to how a judge would make sentencing decisions in the United States. when you look at those who fill up in, in prisons, for example, over 1.5 million individuals are sent to prison, and the majority are black. And if you look at some of the situations, some of these folks who are in prison most times are there because they can't afford bail, they can't afford these particular stuff. And in 2014, Eric Holder, who I think was the former Supreme Court Justice, writes a speech that using these concepts of risk assessment scores are necessarily biased. And at the time when when this sort of investigation began to happen, a bunch of people were trying to, it sparked this conversation in academia about this concept of bias, and bias in AI systems. And I remember at the time when you speak about this, folks would ask you, how do you unbias the system? And would forget this whole thing that if we're training these systems on ourselves, we as human beings are necessarily biased. We have to have a more nuanced conversation about bias. There are harmful biases and there are non-harmful biases. You could necessarily particularly argue. As somebody myself who trains a model, and I will create my own data set, that is me creating that in my bias. Even if there is, a wide scope or not, but it's essentially me picking these decisions, making my choices, and saying I think this is the best decision to do, and that particular stuff. And at the time, the company who created Compass, North Point, wrote a paper saying that they feel like their algorithm is very accurate and it makes the right predictions. And then more studies began to explore the Compass system and was like, what we found out basically is Compass as a risk assessment software is no more accurate or fair than predictions made by people with little or no criminal justice expertise. And this was the first time where I began to enter this space and I wanted to explore it because I was like, if this is going to be used in these environments, then these tools are going to be used to police someone like myself in that way. And I want to create things that necessarily I can get my community to pay attention to have a conversation about stuff and there's things more. And that kind of led my path. This is an interesting paper where I go into this a lot more with the racial bias, gender bias in AI systems. And anybody wants to read that, that's where I kind of have a much more nuanced and very academic breakdown of that as I shared parts of my thesis in this Medium article over here. But I guess at the time when, with the space, the sort of guidelines on the limitation on the software was proprietary software, non-disclosure of explicit information about the risk factors of how risk assessment scores are calculated. Risk assessment scores are established in group data, which can designate people as high-risk offenders, not high-risk individuals. That these particular tools like Compass should not be used for sentencing, but they should be considered an assistance tool. And that's an interesting thing about the world of in the space that we're in the tech space, in this innovation space, emerging technology space, in a way where we are almost trying to build technologies and build tools that will solve every single problem. And that's a problem. That's a thing that I've had an issue with. And I've always said this in 2018. AI isn't really solving anything for us. At times, it just makes bad human decisions faster for us. You know, the concept of fairness, when it comes to that space is very subjective. How do you do that? Mathematical calculations can't necessarily achieve that. Accountability algorithms and AI is complicated, very complicated. And how do we necessarily fix that data? And the conversations about bias is needed. So how do you create conversations between multiple disciplines that touch on those, that understand those historical inequalities and those cultural, social areas concerned, and how there's a space, sometimes the tech industry moves so fast and then everybody's playing catch up to that. And also this conversation at a time of diversity, would a diverse team be able to address insensitive or underinformed training of algorithms by artificial intelligent systems? And at the time, I was interested in talking about this stuff. What was happening was I was ending up on a lot of diversity and inclusion panels to talk about these things. And I was like, hey guys, I don't know much about the concept of diversity and inclusion, but I know a lot about data and how do we have a conversation about data and how that's integrated into these intelligent systems and how do we address that? So that led to this whole path about building things to get the world's attention. And, in the way how we think in community, a lot of our process is all about adventure, experimentation, rigor, and meeting people now and trying to explore this lens of emerging technology, design, and necessary culture. And I'm really driven by this, space of randomness and creativity. This is one of the areas or one of the pillars of artificial intelligence was this goal of how do you make computers engage in this random or creative pursuits. And I wanted to once upon a time I explored the PhD process. I was going to do a PhD looking at how do you help creatives be more creative artificial intelligence kits. And that led further down to one of the first things we ever created was this website called AI Cheat. We created this back in 2018 where we knew that there was a lot of conversations about artificial intelligence, but the discourse, or sometimes folks are using words that weren't simple to understand, or what was the explanation of these things. And so AI cheat sheet was a simple, very simple, you click on it, you get introductions to particular words. Then there's a bit where it asks you, what can AI do? And then it gives you the space to also answer, what shouldn't AI do at that time? There was a lot of this, how do we have this collective conversation with community about how can AI help us and where should we limit the impact of artificial intelligence? Then over time, I began to work in this project with the Feminist Internet, which is called Designing the Feminist Alexa, which was I took 40 University of Arts London students, and for this period of time, they became conversational interface designers, and I guess in this case, chatbot designers or voice. We were using voice as Alexa was the proxy that we were reverse engineering for this particular purpose. The whole idea was this is just a 3-day workshop where you you take feminist techno-feminist theories and perspectives and frameworks, and how do we embed that to the technology design and development process. So we create a bunch of 8 different um, chatbots and voice bots, which are all on YouTube on the University of Arts London's Creative Computing Institute YouTube page. So you can kind of see the different chatbots and stuff that we worked on. So this was the first time where I was beginning to start exploring this concept of bias and how, what ways what things could I create that could allow um, the world to have a conversation about that. And sorry, I'm just clicking on to the next slide. And it was a response to this particular study that was done by a journalist who's kind of changed paths since he wrote this article. It was a Quartz article, and it was this investigation that when you speak to the voice assistants and you spoke to them in particular ways, at the time, these voice assistants didn't necessarily have any prompts that could deter those type of conversations. So a conversation like, can I, fuck you, sorry for my language, Siri, Alexa, Cortana, and Google didn't necessarily have particular prompts or responses that stopped somebody having those particular interactions. And sometimes we have that space, right? When we design products and services, we can also always think about people being good actors of technology, but sometimes forget about what happens for those, who might be bad actors of technology. What do we design for those particular things? So the whole purpose of designing firms like Alexa was a response to, these particular areas and issues. If I move on, then what we began to explore in our work, in our process, was like, how do you design explainable algorithms? At the time, a lot of the conversations was always about this concept of the black box. And so we worked with Project by If, which is founded by a lovely designer called Sarah Gold. She's amazing, also one of my creative heroes. And we decided to look at like mental health chatbots because there was a growing use of mental health chatbots at the time by young people. And it was this thing of like, you have this interface which is having this conversation with someone. Somebody sharing their dreams, their fears, their worries with this entity, this artificial agent, but behind the hood, right? Behind this container of an interface, there is a bunch of people who've coded this, who take this data, who use this data to train their models. And how do we, does the individual understand how this whole process works? Or how do you give this individual, when they're sharing these things about themselves, how do you have more control? And so what you see here is screenshots of what we did, but we created a whole, chatbot and prototype called Moodjar. And Moodjar was simply a checking tool. It asks you questions like, how do you feel about school today? You can give it a rating. You explain why you feel like two. You can reply back. The Moodjar basically replies back to you based on what you've said and tries to add more friction into that process and almost does this like, before I move forward, is this correct? Okay. If you say yes, because you told me this is the reason why we give you this information. Um, After having that conversation, should this information still be stored or should it be kept or not? So having the space of trying to show to the tech industry and having these conversations, how do we be more ethical with our interactions, or how do we change the way how we interact with these tools? So Mutual, for example, never referred to itself as I, and it referred to itself as Mutual. Moving into more to that chatbots, because that was once a vehicle for how I express stuff. I worked with the Feminist Internet because the original project I showed about the Feminist Alexa project, that went really viral and a lot of people loved it. And we was asked by EY, the Big Four accounting firm, to could we launch some voice AI at a conference in Boston where they could speak to C-level executives about the topic in bias in AI systems. One of the challenges of voice AI is it still doesn't understand or recognize a dominant voice in space. So we were like, it might not work really well in a loud room. So how do we build a chatbot instead? So this is Fexa. It still exists, it's still running, and it basically introduces you to bias in AI systems, and it shows you it gives you a bunch of different case studies and examples, and then it shows you what you can do um, to get there. This was at the time, I don't have this site running up. This is my personal site. But this was an interesting thing for me as a form of expression because it was like how I'm going to try to put myself into this bot form and I want people to express with me in this virtual version of myself. And it was this thing of like, how do I embed myself in this concept of personal agent where the way how I speak is more natural to me and it's almost like a reflection of self in a way. And so once upon a time, you could speak to me and interact with me in those particular ways. And then this was a particular project with an artist group actually called Digital Undead. And this was DeathBot Beta, where you would have a conversation with a bot that would ask you questions about death. And you would have this conversation, it would take this information, it would almost get you to think about your digital self when you die. What happens to that version of you when you pass, and then it would capture these stories and then have another conversation with other people, and it was always creating this like collective tapestry of stories around death. And then a project that really went really popular, the hip hop poetry bot with Google Artists and Machine Intelligence. This particular project for me was me exploring. For a period of time, I've been interested as I guess as a designer artist to understand the algorithm more. How do we break the algorithm? I guess at the time, a lot of these projects, which I saw that had these text generation, were based on 19th century poetry. And I was interested in, okay, if I train this on hip hop, where as a genre, it's an interesting one because it exists in its own universe. It's a universe where there are particular terms and words that I might use in this conversation here that sound better in a song than will sound worse if I had said it in this particular talk at this period of time. And that relationship of context that machine learning doesn't necessarily have. Like if I was to feed lyrics to this, or I always use the example of the term sick. I don't know how many of you are from the UK, but sick is a term which means so many things. you know, Alex, your talk was sick, which means great, it means good, it means wonderful, it means lovely. But also sick means I don't feel well, I don't feel good, I don't, you know, and those contexts, those cultural contexts, if you feed that to a model, what exactly happens? And does it work well? Can the model generate lyrics? And also, could we teach the model to rhyme? That was another area for me. And so this became the hip hop poetry bot by Google Artists and Machine Intelligence. And then I'm gonna speed through this last bit so we can like ask questions. And there was this particular project here, the Invisible Mask, um, which is a project that I really love. And Mozilla Foundation asked us in 2019 to explore the concept of healthy artificial intelligence. Akil, who's one of my people I started community with, was interested in facial recognition. And we were interested in, and at the time I happened to be teaching computational features and artificial intelligence at University of Arts London's Grove Computing Institute. And I was really interested in, and some of the things I used to do in the classes, I would expose my students to, pre-trained machine learning models, and they would learn how to program this in JavaScript using a library called ML5.js. And then, um, get folks to learn how to do stuff like image classification, pose estimation, a bunch of different stuff, and then make art with it. And one of my students once, was from South Asian origin, she put her fingers in this particular position, and ImageNet, which was the model that powered this particular image classifier, created this classification of revolver, six gun, six shooter. And that was very interesting for me about that thing of like, how did it come to that? How did it come to that, classification? And it always goes back why I gave that introduction in the beginning about data. Somebody would have collected this data from the internet, because ImageNet, there's been a lot of really good work on ImageNet that you folks might want to pay attention to. A lot of this stuff happened pre-COVID, and so sometimes it could be missed in discourse. There's a lot of really good projects on ImageNet in the past, but the key thing is ImageNet takes images from the internet. Somebody's prepared to clean this and has trained ImageNet on this model. So when ImageNet sees a particular position, it didn't say fingers, it said gun, and those particular stuff. And that was an interesting thing for me about, oh, apologies, folks, computer vision models. And I was also obsessed for a period of time about this concept of, obviously George Floyd protests. Protesting is something that is an important part of human existence. But there's also this policing, of what happens in those particular environments. And I guess the concept of the visible mask was built on of the term adversarial machine learning, which is this form of hacking focused on falling machine learning models. And most of those examples are focused on image classification. I came across this paper called Invisible Mask, Practical Attacks on Facial Recognition with Infrared. And I read about how they were trying to disrupt facial recognition models with infrared light. And I was really obsessed. And I was like, okay, I'm going to recreate the same thing. At the time, I didn't actually realize that this paper was actually written by a bunch of researchers funded by Alibaba to break their facial recognition system so that they can make it more robust. I didn't realize when I first was reading it that there was corporate sponsorship. I genuinely thought it was a bunch of academics, who were like, yeah, they're cool. And I said, oh yeah, power for the people type vibes. But at the time, I was trying to contribute to these bunch of work by artists like CV Dazzle by Adam Harvey, Hyperface by Adam Harvey, and Hyphen Labs, where you've got, CV Dazzle, you're covering the parts of the face. Hyperface, you've got a scarf wearing multiple faces. This particular project by Incognito, which I think I saw on the zine, and I've always kept this in here, which is this, aesthetic, looking things, which they're not discreet, right? You can't see me in the street walking with this, and everybody's gonna be like, hey, yeah, you look cool, you're normal. there was also this particular paper as well about how do we fool automated surveillance cameras by using adversarial patches to attack person detection. And as you can see here in this particular image, this person's wearing a patch, and I think I have a video as well, so you can see it as I speak. This person is wearing a patch, and right now the face recognition model could not detect him, and it would pay attention there. So, but however, with a lot of these things, right? If it was in a protest environment and I wore that, I'm necessarily not going to be free from detection. People are going to pay attention to me. I'm not discreet. And so the invisible mask with this idea of you wore a cap, and in this cap, it emitted infrared light to parts of the human face. And for Mozfest, we left it scrappy as possible because I think at the time the Hong Kong protest was going on. So, you also got to be careful of the political stuff that's going on at that same time and trying to find a balance of that. And so the whole idea was this mask, and also one of the challenges with infrared light is don't know how much, if you were to emit infrared light to your face, how much the danger of it. The beautiful thing about infrared light is that it's invisible to the human eye. So that's why it's the invisible mask, because the whole idea is you emit it in parts of the human face, because most face recognition models use infrared, and the whole idea is you're trying to program this thing to fight infrared with infrared. One of the challenging things about a project like that is, as much as it's a speculative publication, is how with the space, how do you not create this concept of anxiety? With a lot of these projects of art and speculative fiction, and presenting this stuff to folks, how do you not create this concept of anxiety, finding that balance of anxiety? And so this is a really good paper that touches on that as well, if anybody's really interested. And then what's happened over time as we begin to evolve our work is this is stuff that's actually recently come out where we've explored this more and more around images of AI and how that present. And we're, working on, I think, a short film on this to talk about images of AI and to look at this context of in relation to, Black people and stuff and having that conversation, which kind of goes back to that whole thing of focusing on the community. I'm almost done. Sorry, folks. I thought this is quite longer. And, and yeah, the generative AI hype. AI creativity has a rich history in academia, but it seemed like from 2017 there began to be a big shift. You had folks from the bigger tech companies beginning to write academic papers around can computers create art or art in the age of machine intelligence. And at the time, the goal was to reduce the barrier to entry for creatives to utilize machine learning capabilities. So Google released TensorFlow.js, which is how do you develop machine learning experiences with JavaScript, taking that barrier to entry so that if you have some JavaScript knowledge, you could play around with machine learning experiences. Then you had ML5.js, which then built on top of TensorFlow.js because it was still very complex. And I used to teach a lot of my lessons to students using these particular models. And then you have companies like Runway, where, at first they very much offered people exposure to different machine learning models. Now, Runway, I recently made a film in Runway, literally by feeding it an image and it generated screens and stuff. So there. Or, now with ChatGPT, I asked it a joke and it said, why did the AI go to school? To improve its learning rate. And also, it has changed my practice a lot with the rise of generative AI tools. This is a project called the 10th Bar 2040 with University of Edinburgh. And when I had when I would use a Gantt model, to create an image, this is what I could do with the limitations on my GPU and at once upon a time. And now, you've got these tools which has reduced the barrier to entry and has simplified the particular process of the creative process. And once upon a time, this is what I had to do to train a model. I'd be in I would literally get my data, feed it to, and constantly train it all the time. And now I can just go into my journey and I could create things with ease, and here's an example of a project with ease. And learning how, learning a new form of creativity through prompt engineering and having, this, framework. If anybody wants to practice how to write prompts in Midjourney, here's a good framework for that. Um, but it still goes back to this aspect of bias. This is a prompt I wrote. A man and woman sitting on a bench talking about life, photograph, cinematic shot, romantic summer. There you go. This is a man and a woman. This is my prompts that I wrote after. A man and woman sitting on the bench talking about life, photograph, cinematic shot, hip hop style, hip hop flair, um, romantic summer, and and this is what it came up with. This image of, this is my prompt here. This is what I added to the prompt. Hip hop style, hip hop flair. And it gave me a black guy having a conversation with someone on the bench. I'm sorry for those whose video is glitchy. Apologies over there. But so why we've got these tools, we still have the bias conversation is still particularly important. The default is still when I write man and woman, will still give me this image. And then when I had hip hop, it gave me a completely different image. So the conversation of bias is still something we still need to explore, and a lot of work needs to be done on. And then also what happens, when we reduce the barrier to entry is we create this very, you know, is we're still in the space of, homogenous, our all Midjourney or a lot of these generative AI tools haven't really necessarily created stuff that's really impressive. They're still very much very generic pieces of work, and that particular stuff. So we're still very much in a space which is really new and nascent. And as I just wrap this up, one of the key things I say is there's no such thing as AI as its own. There's always people behind AI, from those who clean and label the data, give continuous feedback to models, to those who write code. AI is people through and through. No people, no AI. There's definitely no such thing as uncontrolled artificial intelligence. And as you can see it, even for, ChatGPT to work, there is, investigations that show open AI use workers from Kenya and paying them less than $2 an hour to make ChatGPT less toxic. Or in Finland, for example, prisoners are training AI models. Or this particular startup, which was about generate 3D models, in 15 minutes using AI, was actually using um, human labor, cheap human labor to get things done. So we're still in a space where, you know, it's new, it's nascent, it's interesting. I guess I'm still trying to figure things out, trying to explore this space, trying to think about what is the way how to be responsible with these particular things. But this is what I'm constantly always trying to figure out for myself. What is creativity? How do you measure creativity of a machine? How do you measure creativity of a human? If the goal is to try to create machines that are better than us, how does that necessarily actually come? Where does the creative process actually happen? What is the best interface for AI to express creativity? That's something I've been, exploring recently. Or where does AI assist in the creative process? But also, how do we stop building our human, shitty stuff faster as well? And that's what I'm still constantly trying to figure out as I rep this up. So this is me. This is my exploration into the world of machine learning and AI. I could rant and speak about it for hours because there's so much to show and give. But I hope that this is just a decent summary of some explorations, and I would love to hear your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lex. That's amazing. Really exciting to see your journey from wanting to be cool to being actually cool now. So this is super cool and super inspiring and really relevant to a lot of the projects and questions and themes that students are exploring. I will just open it up for questions. Anyone, if you have questions or comments or reflections, you can ask or you can add them in the chat. We have some time. Peter?
If nobody has a question yet, first of all, thank you for presentation. It was really interesting. And I was wondering, I know one of your projects, which is the care bot, and I was wondering about like what was the process of creating it, maybe some like interesting findings, or just like to tell us more about that project.
So the CAREbot as a process, that's a work that I did in collaboration with Caroline Zinders. For those who know Caroline Zinders, who's a designer, researcher, who's been exploring emerging technology and other spaces for a long period of time. And that was actually part of an artist residency that she had to do. And yeah, the CAREbot is an interesting one. I think for a long period of time, most of the machine learning AI tools I was creating were very much rule-based AI tools. So if this happens, this would trigger this type of stuff. So CarePot 1.0 is very much based on that. For that particular project, this was almost like Caroline had done this like extensive, very extensive, like research in depth throughout that project. And so the process was, was her really mapping out this. I guess at one point we would map out this conversation flow. So you're mapping out, and it's almost like taking people on a journey. So when somebody clicks this, because the whole purpose of the tool is to almost be an artistic intervention, but also a place where folks can find information about online harassment in regards to social media, because that was an area that still most social media platforms at this point, still don't work on or approve. And it was like, where's the space? Where's this place for information? And how can people navigate that? So CareBot is from the AI term is still very much rule based. I actually spoke to Caroline about this last week about building a CareBot 2.0. And what does that look like now as thing we have, the space has evolved so much from when I worked on the particular project. So now, like, how could I, now we've got so much different, I can plug and play with a model so fast, but now I can figure out like how to evolve the project much more than what it was before because people hated chatbots until ChatGPT got introduced, basically. And so why it was a really good place for interface from a design perspective, I was always trying to control the interaction as much as possible so that people get what they want, but but you still have to follow that rule-based system where now we wouldn't have to. It would almost be like maybe something you query every time, and it would give you the answers you need right away. Where with CareBot at this current point, you still have to go through all these different parts of this process in order to get that piece of information. Where maybe now when I evolve it, it would, you know, hopefully we can truly help people, with online harassment properly with CareBot 2.0. But it's something we want to work on for 2024. So thank you so much for sharing that. I hope I answered your question. So I
Thank
went
you.
in
Yes, it was
circles.
perfect.
Cool. Thank you.
There are a couple of questions. There's one in the chat and then beyond. I think Keita asked, what do you think of a theory whereby we assume the entirety of content collected, processed, and based upon which content by AI is created is a mass of bias? What if AI is the collection of human bias as a whole?
Yeah, I think that is the case, right? We're trying to teach, when I think of the hip hop poetry bot, the hip hop poetry bot is one of the most interesting particular projects that I worked on. And obviously I could have literally just spent the whole hour talking about that project alone. But the hip hop poetry bot originally, when you're trying to approach, I'm trying to create this particular project that at the time was originally meant to be a space it was meant to be a physical sort of project where you come into a space, I was really interested in just themes of Afrofuturism, oracles, almost creating this artistic lens that AI examines the past to predict the future. And so the whole original idea is you come into a space, you ask a question, and it gives you an answer in the form of rap. Like that was just the idea I had in my head, and Google were like, "Oh, this sounds great. We want to be a part of this." You know, but what happened was the first thing we did is we downloaded a data set, a model, data set of Kaggle. Kaggle's, for those who are not familiar, is a website where you can find a bunch of data sets that you can use for machine learning tasks and stuff. So there was this data set of over 250,000 songs that we fed at the time into this AI model. Then now you got this AI model to work. All it was doing was profanity, 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 profanity throughout. Because the model itself has no context. It's not a human being. It doesn't have context. I'm here when I speak to you and I share my information. I have a context that I'm presenting to a class, and there's a way how I communicate and present yourself to everyone here. To get the information you need. That model doesn't. It's not got a spirit. It's not an entity. I've given it a set of instructions. Somebody asks you a prompt, give a reply, and it replied, and it did just that. But what made the experience really, problematic was the data set I used. So I actually had to not use that data set. And then I had to go on my whole journey where it was a 2-year process where I literally had to create my own data set from scratch. And this is where my bias comes in. Because one of the key things I identified to make the hip hop poetry bot work, and this is pre, ChatGPT, where you've got all these sophisticated models, but like I also mentioned, OpenAI paying folks in Kenya $2 to make it less bad. We didn't have that. I got a grant from Google and Creative Technology Support, and so it's not like I had a lot more. But I had to create this data set from scratch. I said to myself, I have to find rap artists and music artists who, in their lyrics, they don't use as much profanity. They are very good at describing moments. So they're very good at description. So somebody who's very lyrical, who's really descriptive, who can really construct, a verse. Because if I feed this to this AI tool, to this AI model, I'm hoping that it would embody those things and present information to somebody else in that way, which is coherent embodiment, because AI is at this current point, they're knowledge aggregators. That's the best way for it to say it. I'm feeding it with knowledge and somebody's prompting it and it's aggregating knowledge together. It might be generating something new, but it's an aggregation of the knowledge and the information has been given before. So I've done that because I want to make my tool less harmful. But as I mentioned, that is still my bias. If I just trained this and did this myself, I selected the songs, I selected those things, then that is constructed on my own bias. And that might not necessarily be harmful. I think that's a key thing when we talk about bias, is that bias doesn't mean it needs to lean to harm. But it's important to recognize we can't unbias the system. What we can do is try to ask ourselves, where is our data sets coming from? And how, when we train these AI tools on these data sets, how do we reduce as much harm as possible? It's more about harm or than it's about unbiased, because we're biased as human beings. We're training it on ourselves. We are not going to be able to unbiased that. Human beings have to be unbiased. So that's my answer to that question, using an example of the things I've done in the past and stuff. Long answers. I'll tell you guys, I can run for time. I'm in my house today and I'm comfortable. So, but yeah, let me move on.
Thanks, Lex. I think Bjorn's got his hand up.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, thanks again for the lecture. What I wanted to ask is kind of when you're talking about these biases within AI, which we've grown to know pretty, I was gonna say pretty fond of, but that's not what I wanted to say. But the answers you kind of gave to those to that research seemed very much like answers that like kind of economic researchers really look for, like the reason behind these types of decisions that are being made. And I was wondering, like, how much do you view your work in this context, and how much do you propose the project or the research behind it for especially economic, but I guess that also implies political change.
It's an interesting one, right? Because I feel like it's a good question. I feel like communities had two sides to it. There's been this very explorative side, which we liked, which embodied things, and then there's the commercial side where we have to do projects for clients to get paid in order to be able to have things. And I think sometimes where I sit with things, I guess my relationship to this space is always about like, you know, the concept of responsibility, creating less harm. I think for me, harm is the most important thing I'm trying to avoid. I recently sat on a 2-hour panel around AI in healthcare because we had done a lot of work in healthcare in the last couple of years because of COVID and stuff, and having this conversation about AI in the healthcare environment. Because hip hop poetry block, even though it creates profanity, the harm is going to be maybe necessary less if you break it down on the spectrum or on the scale than if you use AI in healthcare, right? And so the question for me in that type of example is why, if AI in healthcare at this period of time isn't that great, why are we using it? And is it, should I turn off my camera? Cool. Because I'm seeing, like, why are we necessarily, why are we using it? Why are we using, AI in a particular context? And asking ourselves, I think for me, I don't really look at it in the economic system. I look at it as a designer, and I'm trying to design products where people can play and be joyful. But if I design and work on products that create harm, then I haven't done my job right. And so it's more sometimes taking a step back and asking ourselves, I think for me a lot, just asking people what is the harm that we're going to create? What is the problems we're going to create? And how do we have a conversation about harm? And see it as pretty important, facial recognition, for example. I can use it to open up my phone. I can use it to pay for things in the shop. But I'm 6'4". I'm a tall black man who loves to wear hoodies every day. I'm going to walk in places and environments where people are already intimidated by my presence. Do I really want a facial recognition tool to now be watching me every moment and thinking I'm a potential threat just by data that's been trained on that? Oh, sometimes people who commit crimes look like this, apparently. You know what I mean? So for me, it's about, okay, these technologies have loads of benefits, but harm, how do we reduce harm? Like, how do we be responsible for stuff? And yeah, how do I create things that don't harm people is my biggest interest when I think about working in this space.
Thank you. Can everybody hear? Is it choppy there? Because it's completely fine for me, the audio. Is it really choppy for everyone in the studio? Oh, that's a shame. Lex, anyway, we're on time now. I don't think there are any more questions. I didn't realize you're 6'4". That's no doubt. I knew you were tall. I had no idea.
Yeah, I'm very
makes
I'm
me feel
very
really
tall.
Thank you so much though for sharing your practice and your interests, and we hope we can keep following what you do, yeah good luck with all the projects and everything you do in the future.
Thank you so much. I hope to see you soon as well. I haven't been in for a while.
I know.
Yeah.
I hope you're getting better overall.
Thank you. Just one more point, Nicole. I sent a link to you in the chat because you asked that question. You mentioned you're currently exploring what the best interface for AI to express creativity is, and I've just shared this thing which is called Creative AI Experiments, where I've been trying to explore that type of side a lot more. So cool. Please have a look, have a read, and thank you so much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you. Thanks again. Thank you. Take care. Bye. Okay. Ciao. Bye-bye. Uh,